hear that? A massive rumbling in the distance, getting closer and closer? It's the millions of artifacts pouring out of cultural resource management companies. These CRM firms are going out of business, merging, moving, or simply can no longer afford the dead storage. This is chapter 2 of the Curation Crisis. Over the years, millions of archaeological artifacts have been recovered from public and private lands in San Diego. However, the vast majority of these artifacts were still in effect underground. Boxes and bags of archaeological artifacts were scattered among private cultural research management firms, public institutions, and government agencies. A true curation crisis. This is the first curation crisis I'm talking about. The San Diego Archaeological Center opened in 1998. We were dedicated to the care, management, and use of archaeological artifacts. Our goal was to restore archaeological collections to cultural resource status. Our vision was to sustain an institution where artifacts were not only cared for in a state-of-the-art environment, but where professional research continues and the public can enjoy learning about regional history through educational programs and museum quality exhibits. So here we are in 2020. We're still waiting for that dream to happen. What's the phrase, hindsight is 2020? I wish I could have foretold the situation we would be in now. Let's be honest with ourselves. We never really totally solved the original curation crisis. Sure, a few repositories were open like us, but we as professionals recognized that these cultural resources were important, but we never succeeded in a statewide mandate for curation. After spending thousands of dollars, the Archaeological Center was able to get one little line inserted into the CEQA guidelines. If an artifact must be removed during project excavation or testing, curation may be an appropriate mitigation. The word curation is mentioned only once in this huge document. However, now we're in a little bit of problem. We're in a little bit of trouble. Like I said, a lot of CRM firms are going out of business, merging or moving, and they've got a lot of collections in dead storage. Most of these collections are recovered before the San Diego Archaeological Center opened, or they were projects that just plain died. Are these still cultural resources? Yes, but how would anybody know it if they're just stuck somewhere? So, here we're going to start our discussion on any ideas. We should have realized that just chucking collections in a storage room was not a good long-term strategy. Every day it's just going to get worse. Right now, I don't know how many collections you have in your closets, in your stores, in your garages. I just don't know. Before we are drowned in these collections, what should we do? Is it going to take hard work and money? Loads of it, yes. But consider what you are paying for storage right now. Does it prevent you from expanding your services, hiring, or equipment replacement? Do you have a plan for what will become of these collections when you retire or sell your firm? Now, I'd like to open it up for discussion now. Frankly, I have no perfect ideas about what we're going to do about this. We have in the past been able to accept some orphan collections, and this was under a grant we got from the National Park Service for NAGPRA. We were able to take some collections that might have had NAGPRA eligible material in them, but had never been curated, or that material had never been able to be accessed before. And I was real proud of what we were able to do with that, but that money's pretty much dried up. So I'm interested in hearing from some of the CRM firms in how much in the way of collections do you have? Are you worried about what to do in the future, or do you have any brilliant ideas that'll just totally make my day? Don't make me sit here when it's all quiet.
Hi.
Hiya.
So I manage the lab at Applied Earthworks. Mm-hmm. And we have curated, I only want to talk about historic collections. We've curated a number through the years, like the late 1800s turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I have some collections that are sitting on the shelf with no home, and some we're working on with me thinking the same way of, okay, you know, we know that it's really hard. There's a lot of stuff. What do we curate and how we deal with it? I wanted to share that I've worked with San Luis Obispo on one of our collections suggesting deaccessioning. And my experience with that was basically I volunteered some of my time. I went there, and what we did is we went through the collection, reconsidered some of the artifacts, and deaccessioned, and basically kept a sample of the things that we felt strongly that should be kept. So that's one of my ideas, deaccessioning. So I just wanted to share that.
How did you determine that certain artifacts are more important to save than others?
All right. So with this, we have the concept or the method of wanting to keep, basically, if we collected artifacts, nails, and, you know, amorphous metal and all of that stuff, we, at that point when we curated, we kept everything. So what we did is we went through, we had a list. Okay, do we want to look through basically artifacts that don't have any future potential, and some bulky artifacts that were already collected samples of, and we basically followed that. So, you know, things that don't have any future potential, by now we have the maker's marks, we have plenty of samples, nothing unique. It's not going to add any more to what we know already. Right. And I went from there. I definitely was careful. As an archaeologist, we have to have the ethics of, you know, it's our duty towards, when we collect cultural material, to make sure we handle it correctly. But definitely, that's what I followed.
Okay.
And it helped to make room for more important things, hopefully.
Right.
That's the crisis. So,
the center does have a deaccession policy as well. Things that are nothing but rust crumbles, things that might be dangerous, like ammunition that still has gunpowder in it, things like that. And there's some collections that are either so, the information is so poor or whatever, that some of those objects do get put into our teaching collections. However, what concerns me in the CRM community is every company's working in their own little sphere. You know, you said you had all these sample materials, you had hallmarks, you had all that information. But what about, you know, the next company down the road? What do they have, or what don't they have? And it concerns me, especially when I read some of the reports that come in. And I'm gonna be really honest right now, but I can show you some archaeological reports from the same company that have the exact same boilerplate that they did 20 years ago. And what really worries me is that some, you know, builder, he's going to call up the BIA, the Building Industry Association, and said, why do I have to pay for this stuff anymore? They keep finding the exact same things they've been finding for 20 years. The reports say the exact same thing. You know, let's start lobbying and get rid of this CEQA because it's a right pain in the ass. But, you know, and I have to say, whose fault is that? It's the CRM community. Another one of my biggest personal disappointments, professional disappointments, is that we thought once we opened and had all these collections together, that archaeologists, pardon me, would be knocking down our door to come in and do research. There has been pathetically little research done here by the professional archaeological community. There's been some academic works, you know, we have some students that come and do it, but, you know, how are you going to keep this history up to date unless you're constantly renewing your knowledge about what's out there? And, you know, I've asked archaeologists, what's the crack? You know, why? Well, we just don't have time. So, pardon me. So my fear is that it's turned so much into a business that we've left the science out of it. And I think that's a problem. I'm willing to listen to a rebuttal, though.
I do agree with you because it wasn't that long when we had the collection and the client basically was like, oh, what do you mean I'm going to have to pay to do this? And on our part, working with the city for that specific project, we're like, you know, it's something that needs to be done. And we didn't let that go. No, we collected the artifacts and we will research and study. But I think it's going to take a number of us to try to put our heads together to try to figure out, you know, what's the best way to handle artifacts, whether to collect or not, whether to do the analysis in the field and leave what we can't bring behind, whether to sample. So it's like really tricky. And I do agree with you. At least I can't speak for every archaeologist out there, but I can speak for myself that I really, to me, like every little piece of metal and all of this, like somebody's trash is my treasure. So I really get deep into it, and I try in my reports to not only analyze and do the standard, I try to find the story and the association if possible. But I've researched things and found all kinds of stories. So, I mean, it's possible.
I understand. I mean, the thing about deaccessioning is there's always new technology that's coming down the road. What if we throw out all this shell and find out we can do something else with it? But I also recognize that many of the CEQA mitigation projects you're on, they're not going to pay for extra testing. And that's really unfortunate. There is a proposal I made to Chris, to California, the government, saying, why don't we add a little bit of an overhead to some registering sites so that that stuff can't get curated, or we can pay for studies, scientific studies. That fell down flat. Nobody wanted to do with it. And I'll admit, you have a tough road to hoe with developers. I've personally visited with developers who were furious about having to pay curation fees. But there was one, I finally got one that was willing to do an exhibit with us. ASM had done a brilliant job on this collection for a large housing development. And they even showed up for the exhibit opening. I mean, that was really brilliant, but it doesn't usually happen that way. And I understand they hate you. They want you out of their way as quickly as possible. And God help you if you're in La Jolla, because La Jollans just get really upset about the fact that they can't build their pool because they're part of the Spindrift site. And I totally understand that. But you know, we have to start somewhere. And the thing that really worries me is that several larger companies have moved or gone out of business lately. And what happens to those collections? I'll admit there's no law that requires you to keep that stuff. Nothing. It's been your own professional integrity, but that integrity tends to stop when there's nothing in the wallet to be able to take care of this stuff in perpetuity. But you know, we have to figure this out, because I'm just afraid that it's going to irreparably damage archaeology in California. Another one of the complaints I have is that with CEQA, we're all working in our own little jurisdiction. We're not reaching across the county line and saying, hey, I found this donut stone, do you guys have them too? We're not writing a story of prehistoric California whatsoever. Most archaeologists agree that cultures are moving in and out of the area here in San Diego, mostly as a result of climate change. So if they moved out of the area, what if we see similar tools from the culture that we have here? Does that mean that's where they migrated to, or what? But nobody's looking at that big picture at all. And it makes me sad, because I feel like I'm, right now I feel like I'm a store that's closed for COVID. I got all this stuff and nobody's coming in to look at it, frankly. Can we hear from somebody else?
Well, Cindy, I have absolutely no reputation in this business, since I'm an amateur, and I could say some things that will probably upset people. But back when I was working with Ed Muntz and looking at collections, some of the older collections from CRM firms were full of just rocks. And I got, Ed add Muntz's permission to throw the rocks out into the garden and reduce these collections by down to just a reasonable number of pieces. And the question is what is really out there, and what, can we lure someone into, by giving a donation? You can come in and give the donation, maybe find something pre-10,000, pre-16,000.
Well, I think that's an idea, Jim. And, I've toyed with the idea of coming up with some kind of guidelines on what's okay to deaccession from your collection before curation. And I know that some firms have done that on their own, but it might be a good idea to have some of that codified, to say, hey, we really don't need, 500 pounds of shell mitten, but you should preserve a representative example. There's a ton of things they can do with shell. I was going to say something else about that.
Well, your comment on keeping things because new technology comes up. For example, the medieval woman's jaw, in which they found lapis lazuli in, is very interesting, and no one thought about doing that. So what if you repatriated all those jaws and all those skeletons back? You'd never be able to go look for them, right?
Well, our hands are pretty tied with NAGPRA as far as repatriation. But I have looked at some very early collections here that came into the center. And for some reason, some of these collections that were done in the 70s, they could not recognize quartzite for the life of them. They called it all kinds of stuff. It was kind of crazy. Nomenclature is another kind of bee in my bonnet. If I see one more entry that says small, medium, or coarse grain metavolcanic, what does that mean? I can tell you right now, it means something different to every single firm out there. And I think it would be a good idea for us to sit down and put together some guidelines on rock types as well. Actually involve some geologists in this, perhaps.
Well, there's silence, so I'll get more in trouble again. I did archaeology, started out in Virginia, and Virginia has a very neat, they've got it. You have to belong to the Virginia Archaeological Society before you belong to any other archaeological society, and they're all put together. And there's a Northern Virginia, and there's different societies, and they all work together and they all share data. But us being California, of course, we can't do that, right?
If for some reason, and that's a shame. I think that the archaeological societies are much, much stronger in other states than we have here. It doesn't seem like the professional and avocational groups hold hands very much and do things together, and I think that's a shame.
When I sat next to the table sorting artifacts in Virginia, I was sitting next to people who were donors and people who were well-qualified retirees, retired military officers, retired executives who had the money and time to do it. Around here, I don't see that.
Well, San Diego does suffer from a wealth of things to do with your time. And I'll admit that our coming here and sorting rocks at the Archaeological Center may not be as prestigious as being a docent at the Fine Arts Museum, but I think it's a lot more fun. just because I make your cake on your birthday. But I agree. I would love to see more professionals being involved with our volunteers here as well, once our volunteers are able to come back in. I'm very proud of some of our student interns who have gone on to do research projects here. But I find at the four-year institutions and up, if they're trying to get their postgrad degree, that they're pretty much stuck doing what their professor is doing. They're not allowed to have their own project, and I think that's a shame. I would love to see some new world, old world comparisons done with our collections. I don't know what could come out of that. That's the exciting part of it. For example, our donut stones. I know of donut stones in several other places around the world. Were they used for the same purpose or not? Or would some of that knowledge give us ideas about some of the other mysterious objects we have in our collections? I just don't know. But we're pointing out a lot of kind of holes in the system here and things that need to be fixed. But my biggest worry right now is what's going to happen to those archaeological collections that are sitting out there and are basically going to wind up homeless. San Diego has a huge homeless situation, and I'm afraid artifacts are kind of in the same boat. Does anybody have any ideas about what could be done with these, I don't know what to call them, heritage collections, orphan collections?
This is Kurt Duke. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say and this may be more related to just the general topic. I'm wondering, has anybody had any luck implementing mitigation measures similar to what they do for biology, where you basically, a developer, as a mitigation of his development, would basically pay a fee, a mitigation measure fee, whatever you want to call it, basically that if they're going to impact a site, then they donate $2,000 as a curation mitigation that could go and number one, it could help with all these older heritage or orphan collections, and then number two, going forward, it just becomes a way to keep facilities like yourself or the Cooper Center in Orange County or anywhere else. It would be a place where they would continually have some stream of money coming into their institution so that curation can continue and hopefully get better. I'm wondering, what have you or anyone else seen with that? Any luck?
Yes, Kurt, actually we have. We have a program with the County of San Diego, and it's not a real positive fee, it's more of a fine. So if you have some property out there and it's in the jurisdiction of the County of San Diego, and you just go ahead and willy-nilly grade it without getting your proper permits, if the county finds out about it, they will assess a cultural impact fee. It's a lot like that mitigation fee. And that fee comes to the Archaeological Center, and we can use it for the rescue of collections that don't have a home, for example. But it's usually quite small amounts, like 1,000 here, 1,800 there. It's not a huge amount of money. Again, you have to be caught to be fined this fee. And we call it a cultural impact fee. And we have our guidelines here for how we're going to use that money. One of them is this orphan collection situation. So we haven't got the city to adopt anything like that. And our local jurisdictions have kind of different attitudes about curation. We have very few collections, say from Poway or Del Mar or Carlsbad. Their city governments just don't really care about curation. We haven't been able to have them see the light yet. But I think if we can expand this model of the cultural impact fee, I think that'll have a real positive effect on some of these collections that won't have a home pretty soon. I think Carol Sayre had a comment, but I couldn't quite read it.
Yes, Carol had asked if we photograph the artifacts before deaccessioning. Absolutely.
We have a very stringent deaccession policy, and the board as a whole has to approve whatever is going to be deaccessioned. For example, I don't have it in this room, but we basically had a bag of rust, and it was a can, I think, but I'll save a few flakes from it, but there's no sense in really keeping it at this point. Again, if the item is just destroyed beyond use, dangerous, we've had to deaccession some items because they were so contaminated by, frankly, mice. I think some of these artifacts that actually pass through the mouse's gut, if you know what I mean. So, we do have that policy, but I think long and hard before we decide we're going to do that. Somebody's talking about leaving sites in situ. And capping. I do think that's a good idea. There are many sites in San Diego that are like that. The Harris site is capped. Istagua, there's quite a few out there, but I haven't been convinced that the research done in the field actually answers all the questions about a site. I know that the developer is in a hurry and basically he wants you to just get that stuff out of the way. But I think that the way archaeology is done in San Diego County needs a little sprucing up in the analysis of some of the data that's recovered, and also how it's synthesized into an overall picture of the prehistory and history of San Diego County. I don't see that happening. I still see company just doing their own separate things. And I think in academia, nothing thrives within its own little sphere. You need to open up those boundaries a little bit and share ideas. I understand it's a competition, but I would love to bring back a little of the science into this industry.
Do we have any more questions before we
Or hopefully answers.
I see someone's looking
Let me
for
go
a
back to
willing
Virginia.
benefactor, so if anybody knows one. Okay, so feel free if you
Oh, sorry.
Let me go back to Virginia.
My name's Tamara. I'm from the San Bernardino County Museum. We're an archaeological repository for the county of San Bernardino. And we had an instance where we had a CRM firm said, listen, we have this collection. The developer ran out of money. We have it here in our basement. And we actually coordinated with San Manuel, who's our neighbor of the Serrano tribe. And now that many tribes are creating their own, centers or repositories or cultural centers, they actually were the ones who stepped up and took it because we couldn't, and so that might be an option. I'm not sure the situation in San Diego.
Thank you, Tamara. There was, I don't know if it's still going, there is kind of a repository, but it kind of, the funding I think was lost when the casino was lost. And the thing is about some of the tribal repositories is there's not a lot of research capability done. And it tends to be not very accessible, and I think that's a shame to the community. I do think that I think there's plenty to go around as far as the number of collections. San Diego is now up to like 34,000 recorded sites or something like that, and I guess an honest question would be: do we need to keep doing archaeology? Do we know everything we know already? And I would say no, because frankly, the work hasn't been at that level that I think we can sign off on the prehistory and history of San Diego County. I really don't. And especially in the avenue of scientific investigation. I mean, tests, qualitative tests, such as C14 dating, things like that. And I think, I'd like to see that level rise a little bit, and I think the Archaeological Center can play a role in that if the companies are willing to. Captain, you had another comment?
I was going to say in Virginia, if there was a site being developed by a developer, they'd invite the Archaeological Society out that would actually do the work and then be responsible for curating it. And
yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case in California at all. It's not the way the guidelines are written.
5 generations California. I understand California does things very differently.
Yeah. And it's a shame. It's a shame. Like, I think there should be more interface between the professional and avocational archaeological fields. Because, frankly, the avocational groups, they have retired folks like yourself who have an interest and a lot of knowledge and are willing to go out there in the hot sun and do stuff like that. But here in San Diego, especially, you have to be qualified to work in certain jurisdictions, and most avocational archaeologists simply don't meet that. Pardon me.
Well, that's real easy. Just go take Tim Gross's course and you're in.
I think back in the 60s and 70s, that's how it was done a lot before.
Oh, yeah.
Before cultural resource management as an industry took off, and now it's all contracts and bids, and the field schools and the avocational archaeologists, you know, that's sort of something from the past for sure in California.
I see that more in the East Coast area because it's you know, early American history, a lot of historic sites, and everybody wants to dig at those. But after spending several days in a basement that had been flooded with, this was, gosh, late 1700s, that had oyster shells packed in there like concrete. I just hated life. That was the hardest job I ever had. Plus there were ticks everywhere. I know we have our issues here, but that was one of the hardest jobs I have ever done. Was digging through those bloody oyster shells and finding meager things like pipes and things like that. I appreciate all the suggestions, and I hope I haven't sounded too much like I just shut them down. I think it's probably going to be a combination of ideas and actions that's going to make this work. The trick for me has been getting anybody with legislative power to give a crap about it. They just kind of don't want to hear it because, frankly, the building industry puts a lot in their coffers when they're running for re-election. But fair warning to the firms, you know, unless we start proving why this is important, it's going to go away. CEQA is always under threat of being toned down. And, you know, it's not just your livelihood. Hopefully, you know, you still have that crystal in your brain of this is science, and I really want to prove something. I want to have a real research design. Then, hey, somebody was here.
We have one more question from the chat. Chris Blake asked, is there a database of artifact discovery sites? Seems like even if we do not save most of the artifacts, isn't the location important and worth saving?
Yes, the California has a system of, it has a database, and almost every county, or I should say every region, has an information center where when a site is discovered, the information like the coordinates, what kind of site it is recorded with the state. I have tried to have more information included with that, including was any of the stuff curated, and if so, where, so that it doesn't disappear. Honestly, I had a woman call me up whose ex-husband had left a lot of boxes of artifacts in the garage, and she called me up. She says, unless you come and get this, I'm throwing it out in the driveway, the gravel driveway. And I succumbed, and I went out and got it. The next time I saw that archaeologist, I gave him what for as well. He did wind up contributing a little bit, mostly because he was afraid of what I might do to him. So we do have that system. Unfortunately, you know, that information can't be made public because people might go out and pot hunt. And although, you know, very few objects in California have a huge monetary value, I do see stuff on eBay all the time. And I always say, if there had been a golden idol with emerald eyes found in San Diego, I would have sold it long ago, so I wouldn't have to fundraise all the time. And I'll admit that freely. Did I answer your question, Chris?
Okay, last call for questions.
I do want to mention, as far as the artifacting in the chats, I don't know about you guys in San Diego. I know we have our artifacts, you know, our accessioned artifacts on an online database that, you know, the public can access. Obviously, it's been vetted through, you know, tribal sensitivities and the like. As far as archaeological material, we accession them in bulk. So it's hard to have every single piece of, you know, lithics up on a website. You know,
Tamara, we are actually going to have some of our I call them key artifacts up on our website where, of course, everybody's investing more and more digital output since people can't come and see us. The one thing that I worry about, and when I get an invitation to speak to rockhound groups and things like that, I always have a little bit of trepidation because I don't want to give them the handbook on how to look for artifacts. Because almost every week someone comes in here and said, "Hey, I found this, is it an artifact and how much is it worth?" Most of the time I get to tell them, no, it's not an artifact. And no, I'm not going to tell you what it's worth anyway. But in San Diego, that's a real issue here because there's just so many sites.
And one more go. In Borrego, the paleontologists and the rockhounds all work with the Enzo Borrego Foundation along with the archaeologists. In fact, they do cooperative stuff, like when the sand mammoth was found, the archaeologists worked around that particular site and also helped them with that site.
Yeah.
The Desert Archaeological Society, which is kind of out of our San Diego area.
Right. They have a strong group there. And I think because there aren't a lot of development projects going on. And I know Robin out there at Borrego has done an excellent job of keeping, all this together and moving along. I really am envious of what she's able to accomplish there. Here in San Diego, it's a natural history museum that deals with paleontological stuff. And you don't usually see the two together at sites, with the exception of a few that I don't even want to talk about, because it's just a difference in geology, where the layers are and what have you. But in a big city like this, it's just hard to be able to honestly say, gee, I'm not worried about such and such pocketing artifacts.
Well, Robin is retired, so you need to make friends with a new person.
Oh, she did. Oh, bless her heart. Yeah, that'll be great. I might do that soon. Hint, hint. Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it. If you have any other comments or like to extrapolate a little bit, my email address is cstankowski@sandiegoarchaeology.org. Our website is sandiegoarchaeology.org. And of course, you know where that is because you signed up for this lecture. And thank you very much. I really appreciate it.